Are we seeing the beginnings of a second EuroMaidan revolution, this time in Georgia? So, back in 2014, there was the EuroMaidan revolution. Afterwards, it became known as the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine. It took place in late 2013 into early 2014, and there were large-scale protests in many Ukrainian cities, in particular in the capital, Kyiv, on Maidan Square, Independence Square right in the center. And these protests began as a reaction to the then Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was considered pro-Russian. He decided not to sign an association agreement with the European Union, which is actually something he had ironically campaigned on doing, which is what he had a mandate for. And he indicated that he was open to joining a rival association agreement with Russia and basically precluding Ukraine from going on the path towards eventual European Union membership sometime in the distant future. Now in Georgia, yesterday, the European Parliament refused to acknowledge the results of the recent Georgian parliamentary elections. They said that there was significant fraud and irregularities in the voting. And as a reaction to that, the Georgian Prime Minister, who is considered Russian-friendly, pro-Russian, he stated that Georgia will suspend their EU accession talks with the European Union until 2028. So Georgia is actually a lot further along in the accession process to becoming a member of the European Union than Ukraine was in 2014. They are already a candidate country. However, by suspending the accession talks until 2028, that is pushing back Georgia's potential accession to the European Union by a significant amount. He did say that they would continue to implement reforms that will put Georgia in a better position for joining the European Union. However, as a former lawyer at the European Commission, not taking part in any accession talks basically will delay the accession process by many years, if not indefinitely, and that is what the fear is. There has been big reaction in Georgia. There are big protests in the center of Tbilisi. The Georgian president, as opposed to the Georgian prime minister, she is considered pro-EU, and she went out on the streets with the protesters, in fact, right up to where the riot police were lined up. So, are we about to see something very similar to what happened in Ukraine in late 2013? That's the point we are now. It all seems to happen in the winter. When it gets cold, these protests in this region. Eventually, Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine was ousted and replaced. He was voted out. First, he left for Russia, as it turned out, and he was replaced with an interim president by the Ukrainian parliament with a vote in the parliament simple majority, and eventually he was then fully replaced in a new election. Petro Poroshenko became the new Ukrainian president. He is pro-Ukraine joining the European Union. However, as a reaction to the EuroMaidan revolution, Russia began the Russo-Ukrainian War and invaded Crimea, illegally annexed it, and started a war in other parts of the east of Ukraine in the Donbass region. Many years later, in 2022, they then tried to seize the capital, Kyiv, when they were unable to increase their influence in Ukraine, and Ukraine continued on a path under Volodymyr Zelensky towards eventually wanting to join the European Union. Ukraine is now a candidate country. Obviously, we have the biggest war in Europe since World War II, and there are probably more than 1 million dead, injured, and missing, primarily combatants, primarily actually Russian combatants, and Russia controls about 20% of Ukrainian territory. However, in Georgia, there are two parts of the country that are in a similar situation to eastern Ukraine was prior to the 2022 invasion. There is Abkhazia and there is South Ossetia. Now, there was a war in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, and those two parts of the country had had de facto independence, not de jure, not legal, since the early 1990s. However, Russia, by invading in 2008, they shored up support and increased the amount of territory that pro-Russian separatists controlling the country. So the big question would be if these protests work out in a similar manner to the EuroMaidan protests did in Kyiv in 2013, 2014. I was actually there. I got to see it with my own eyes. I went in late 2013 when the protests began, maybe a few weeks after they began, as I had already scheduled a trip to Ukraine at the time, and then I returned. It would have been very early February 2014, so a couple of weeks before the overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych, the success of the revolution, and I was there on Maidan Square to see it, and it was quite a dramatic scene at the time. Eventually, over 100 protesters were killed in the EuroMaidan protests, and then the Russo-Ukrainian war began. However, today, Ukraine is on the path to EU accession. The part of Ukraine that is still free and independent of Russia. They are now a candidate country. However, Russia did invade the country as a direct response to the Euromaidan revolution, and obviously as an extension we have the 2022 invasion. So what would happen if the protesters are successful and they either have a new election and then the opposition comes to power, or there is an overthrow of the government and they install an interim government that is pro-joining the European Union and not so friendly to Russia? How will Russia respond this time? Are they going to invade Georgia again? They invaded in 2008. And where are they getting the forces to do that from? At the moment, not only do they have this huge war on Ukrainian territory, Ukraine actually occupies a small part of de jure Russia in the Kursk Oblast, and they have been there since the summer, and Russia has been unable to eject those Ukrainian forces. Are they going to go and fight in Georgia now? That would seem to be a strain on their resources, and in fact, the Georgian Prime Minister has previously accused Ukraine of wanting to see a situation where Russia and Georgia end up as a second front in the conflict. This is all very possible, and it will be very interesting to see, number one, if the protests are successful and what direction Georgia takes, and what will be Russia's response. Do they actually have the resources to open a second front at this time, or will Georgia be allowed to decide its own future? So on that point, I will end the video. Slava Ukraini, Героям слава!